Alrighty, it is time for part 2 of our set review. This time we're taking a look at Ice. Starting off, we have I'll Handle Him, 1 CP, 3k. Uh, Basically draft fodder. You can tap it to either dull or freeze a forward. Even if this froze a character, it's really not that interesting. You could say, well, it's a 1 cost, like Bart's Boko can play it, but there's a 1-drop Kate Sith from Opus 1 that dulls a forward on entry that is already doing what I'll Handle Him does better. There's just not really a reason to play this card outside of Limited, but it probably is good there. Anything that lets you remove a blocker in Limited is going to be okay. Armor is part of the cycle of if you control 3 or more of the same color, then the cost to cast it is reduced by 2. Ice may actually play this if a mono ice deck ever emerges, just given that currently there are no engines that are ice backup searching for an ice backup, which has been a weird problem for Ice because they have cards like Kefka and Camelot that are payoffs for having large numbers of mono ice backups and no real ways to get to that. So this is a way of getting there. Is it good enough? Probably not, but this is one of the two that I think actually has a chance of seeing some form of play, even if it's not in super serious decks. Calbrenna, this is our first hero. It's 3 CP, 7k. Weirdly, it's a forward this time. Calbrenna usually comes in as a monster, but Calbrenna has back attack. Notably, it's category 4, so this will power up Iridia. When Calbrenna enters the field, choose an ability that's choosing only one character either player controls. The ability is now choosing Calbrenna instead if possible. So, kind of like a back attack version of Charlotte. And then when Calbrenna is damaged by an opponent forward, you get to deal damage equal to Calbrenna's power, which makes sense. Calbrenna usually has come through as Earth, so kind of having an Earth effect on an Ice card makes sense. Kind of the Ice part would be the back attack, which is kind of becoming Ice's keyword to try to make up for their lack of summons. This is very interesting. And Wind has had a similar effect in Mid, but Mid costs 4. So Calbrenna is probably better on that front, and Calbrenna has upside, which Mid does not. I think there's a good chance this sees play depending on what the current meta is. There's definitely situations where you could do bring this in against a Warrior of Light. All of a sudden now that Warrior of Light pings this then pings something for 7k and kills I don't know, some 7k on the other opponent's field. And that seems pretty decent, even though the Warrior of Light is relatively free. This can absorb Porum or any kind of a removal ability for your smaller things, protecting cards like Rydia. There's maybe a chance for an Ice Earth Rydia list to come out thanks to cards like Calbrenna. It'd be really interesting to see if anything like that comes out. But this card seems very decent so far. Also notably, you can do stuff with if you play at Ice Earth, you could go you could play Cecil, tag Cecil out for Win Cecil, and then when they target, make them pay the 2, and then Calbrenna to make it choose the new target, at which point they'll have to pay the 2 again. Lots of really interesting things this card does. We have Juggler, which is another one of our full arts. It is a backup with back attack that dulls a forward on entry. It's not stunning, but these cards are always really interesting, especially if we go into National Season with 2-deck format. Backups with back attack become significantly better if you know you're going second, because it allows you to basically steal the first turn of the game and the tempo from your opponent. Juggler being able to do that does mean it has extra utility. Is that enough to make it see play? Probably not. But it is something to keep an eye on if somebody is running an Ice something blind second deck. I could see Turks taking that slot potentially, but we will have to see. Edward. Edward is a 2CP EX backup, category 4, again very relevant for Iridia. When Edward enters the field, you get to break a dull forward if your opponent controls 2 or more dull forwards. This is fantastic. This is really, really above rate for the effect. It's not hard to get 2 dull forwards. You're in Ice, you should be able to do that anyway. EX burst is fantastic. You can kind of punish aggression. I don't know what it is. Edward just gets really good ice backups pretty much every time. If you play this as a 2 CP backup, you're fine with that. You have to play some number of backups in your deck anyway. Genesis, a good friend of mine, Spoiler, in Travis. There's Warp 3 for 2. Pictologica 7. Genesis enters the field. You get to do one of the two. If it was 2 to warp, you get to do 2 of 2. You can choose up to 2 characters and freeze them, so you get to like tax out 2 backups, and you get to make your opponent randomly discard 1 card. All the text on this card is fine. It is very expensive. 5 CP for random discard is way too much. That effect is generally priced at around 3, so you have to get the warp in for this to be good. Warp is way too long. It is effectively a limited card that I will stop talking about right now. Cisne is not a limited card. This is the City of Final Fantasy, Category 7, 2 CP backup job member of the Turks. Member of the Turks is really interesting because Sang does not have to play a forward. Sang can play a backup, and Cisne is a very expendable member of the Turks. When Cisne enters the field, you can place 1 shuriken counter on Cisne. You can tap, remove 1 shuriken counter from a character you control, notably that says character, not from Cisne. Choose 1 character, dull, and freeze it. So you get to kind of one-time tap her to dull freeze a character. All of that text is very good. She does not break herself, which in some situations makes her an improvement on cards like the Hurdy from a few sets ago. Also of note, there are cards that have shuriken counters other than Cisne. She can throw one of Yuffie's shurikens. She can throw one of Edge's shurikens if you were going to play like an Ice Wind Ninja deck. Does that exist? Probably not. Is it a very cool synergy regardless? Absolutely. I'm glad they did it. I think this card is really good. It'll probably slot in somewhere. Where that is exactly, I don't know. I could maybe see this in like an Icewind deck that like is playing 2 CP Yuffie as the other Yuffie. Obviously, she's going to fit in well with Turks if they're playing Sang. You can kind of up your Turk count. She is also another Ice Lightning backup engine now. You can go President Shinra into Cisne and have Ice Lightning color fixed. She's the 3rd way to do that now, so I don't know how much play she's going to see for that, given that I think it's the weakest of the 3 engines. Reeve, Kate Sith, and Restrictor or Nero are both better, but the option's there. That also frees you up to play Reeve for another card, a different Reeve if you wanted to. It lets you. It just gives a lot of like interesting options. Very good card. She will see some play somewhere. Jill Nabat, if all characters you control have ice, she gains 2,000 power. And when she's put from the field in the break zone, pay 2 to choose 2 characters, dull freeze them. Notably, it's not up to 2. They really tried to make this not work in like a 13 aggro sense. And even if you did, you don't want to play a 3-cost forward in that deck anyway. This is effectively draft fodder and not much else. Setzer. This is not draft fodder. This is a 2 CP backup job gambler, category 6. Category 6 forwards you can control can form a party with forwards of any element. Notably, 6 is kind of the new party deck compared to something like Avalanche, for example. Avalanche is was the previous party deck. Now there's so many different party effects that 6 wants to get off. Setzer effectively making all of the Stooges able to party together is actually a really big deal for cards like Celise, for cards like the new Lock, and then also for himself, because when 2 or more category 6 forwards control form a party and attack, you can dull freeze a character. Notably, this stacks, so if you do this with Celise, you can get essentially 2 freezes and a dull freeze. If you can get 2 parties off in a turn, that's 4 freezes and 2 dull freezes. You can basically lock your opponent out of the game entirely with Setzer. This card is really, really good. The only real downside is you're replacing the 4 CP EX backup, which is also good, but there's enough recursion in 6 that they will probably slot this in over the old one, given the utility this provides to a deck that really wants access to both of these effects. Celise. So if you control a card named Lock, Celise gains haste. Category 6, of course, by the way. The card Lock you control gains haste, so she gives haste to both herself and Lock. When she enters the field, you choose up to the same number of forwards as the Category 6 characters you control, and you dole them. So if you have a, 2 6 backups plus herself and a lock, voila, you've now doled like 4 characters and can now swing in freely. For 2CP 5K, that's a lot of utility. The biggest problem with this card has nothing to do with any of the text on the card. The card itself would be incredible if it was named anything else. The only downside to this card is the name Celise, which conflicts with the best engine card in 6 if FFdex wants to let me load. This Celise is one of the key cards that makes 6 work at the moment. You can use her to gain value out of your party attacks, which is going to be even better now with the new set. She searches lock, which is one of the key cards in the deck, no matter which lock you end up playing. Or she forces a discard, so she always is 2CP. 2CP 7K is obviously better than 2CP 5K. And I honestly think that even having a Celise on field, or the threat of a Celise thanks to Interceptor, is one of the things that makes 6 a really powerful deck. And if you don't have that, I wonder how good 6 would actually be. And this Celise doesn't replicate that. She kind of does her own thing. I do think that probably you end up running 3 of this Celise and 1 of this one, just because this is so good to get with Edgar. You can go, instead of doing the normal thing with Edgar, where you go Edgar, get back Sabin, and Sabin, play Sabin, you could go Edgar, get back, lock Celise, play lock, play Celise, dull freeze 3 characters, swing in for 2 points of damage, right? We'll have to see. But she's very good and a very, very pretty full art, so I don't really know how 6 is going to be, because 6 I think changes the most of any top tier deck, while probably improving this set too. Soldier 3rd class, for every Soldier 3rd class in the break zone it gets 1,000 power, and then when it dies you get to play another one to the field. Very, very good and limited, of course. There are other Soldier 3rd classes, so you can play and get this to be like an 11k on the last one potentially. Does that really matter? Probably not, but it is nice. What does the other Soldier 3rd class even do? It's a fire card. Enters the field, you can search for another one. So, I mean, it's not bad. It's not incredible. It's not something you're excited to play, but be a fun draft or a cube card for sure. Cerulean Drake, this is the common ice monster. When it enters the field, you can freeze a forward. You can tap and sacrifice it to dull a forward, so you can kind of 1 CP dull freeze, about the going rate for this effect on a monster. And then for ice 2 and tapping itself, you can break a dull forward, which is a little bit under the going rate for it, assuming you get value out of the freeze as well. A lot of utility on this card, which is really nice. It'd be very good in a Mira deck that's willing to, looking for a decent 1-drop ice monster. But I think that this probably is just a little too low impact to see play when cards like YKT exist. But it's not a bad card, it's just a little bit too specific. Up next we have Terra, Opus 20 rare. So, obviously category 6, 4 cost 8k. When she enters the field, choose a summon a cost 4 or less in your break zone, add it to your hand. Really wish this didn't have the restriction. I don't think it really matters that much. It's not restricted to ice, which is nice because nobody wants to play an ice summon. Notably, this gets the Shiva from last set, which is really cool. And the hero ice summon in this set is very good, although very strange in how it would interact with this. And then she has a party trigger where she can cast a summon. The big question people are probably going to have is how realistic is it to matter that you can cast a summon? The best 4-cost summon just left the format thanks to Sildur's getting banned. You probably have to have a water summon for that to be super nice. You want to be able to draw to replace it. Cost 4 or less is restrictive, but it is free. It is a nice little bonus. I don't think this is going to slot into many 6 decks, but it's not a bad card. Knights reprinted. I still hate this entire cycle of backups. I can't believe they just reprinted them rather than designing new ones. I think it's stupid. I will move on from here. Number 24. I was reading the Crystarium's How to Win Limited for this set today, and they mentioned something with this card, which is that they think they're missing something because this card does not seem to have a downside. So number 24 is a 3-drop 9k, so it's above curve. Granted, power is not the most important, but it does matter because when it enters the field or at the start of your main phase, you get to put a barrier counter. And when a barrier counter's on them, you get to remove those barrier counters and make the damage 0 instead. So on your turn, number 24 does not take damage. Oh, actually, that's period. It's just if it's on, if he has a counter. So 3 CP 9k with protection, already really good. And then there's a weird downside where if your opponent doesn't deal damage to 24, he will dull himself at the end of your main phase, which he probably should be attacking anyway. So I mean, that's not really a downside. Basically, they just tried to prevent number 24 from being a blocker once per turn for free. But, like, if you want him for that effect, he's still going to be effective for 3 frickin' turns. So it's like, who really cares at that point? Really, this is going to matter about how much, like, a weirdly sticky forward is going to be there. It's really good and limited. It's not, like, the worst. It's Category 6 does a lot of help here as well. There's a lot of room, and especially, like, lists that are playing just pure fire ice without the Stooges. There's a lot of room for like weird extra 6 forwards. This wouldn't be a bad one for those lists over something like the Vargas you would normally see if you want like an ice card instead. But it's not super high impact on entry, so for that reason I think this is just okay. Very cool card. I'm glad it's actually at high rarity because I think this would be really, really bad for limited, but it's not stunning. Madius, FFTA. So this is a 2-cost ice summon that will either freeze all the forwards or freeze all the backups and remove itself from the game. So they didn't want you to loop this summon at all. There's currently no way to return a remove from game card back to the break zone. So you get 3 bullets of Madius and you're done. Is that good enough? I think so. I think the ability to stun your opponent for 1 turn is actually really, really potent. Just look at how good Vincent was last set, for example, at being like this 3 CP backup that just sort of forces your opponent to skip their turn. Especially in like aggro ice decks that are like trying to kill in like 3 or 4 turns. Think something like a Fire Ice 13, right? This can like stun your opponent for 1 turn on their backups to make them really go minus to try to like play the game. Because when you're going early, you have to be using your backups to play your forwards. And you're more than happy to even trade 2 CP for 2 CP at that point, right? So I think this card is good. It will see some play, but it is... this will be annoying when it's good, for better or worse. Wicked Mask. This is a monster with back attack. Not very many of those. Category 4 again, so we get more weird Ridius synergy. 3 cost. When it enters the field, you choose a summon that is choosing 1 character in any zone. You may choose another character. Notably, this is really good against removal spells. There are not a lot of summons. This is kind of like a Calabrina for summons, right? But there are not a lot of summons that are removal spells that make you target your opponent's forward. Think something like this Bahamut. This just says choose a forward, right? Arc makes you choose an opponent's forward, but Medine does not. You could cast this, make them Medine their own forward. You could make them Fenrir their own forward, or Shiva their own forward, right? Just a lot of really interesting options. Dryad just says choose a forward. Shiva says choose a forward. So the ability to like intercept those is really nuts. And there's like cuter, funnier things you can do. You can steal buffs from like your opponents. So your opponent tries to give themselves first strike with the Belias. You can instead give the first strike to your own forward. Zolera says choose a forward, not opponent's forward. The really funny one is you can Kusith your opponent's, like the wrong card in your opponent's break zone, give them back like a dead Sarah or something instead of the Shantoto they want. It's cute. How good is it actually going to be depends on how many decks in the meta are playing summons. Notably as well, if there's no other forward but you don't want to lose the card on field, say you have a Ready that's powered up and your opponent's Leviathaning it, you can play Wicked Mask, and then on the stack of Wicked Mask first effect, make it a forward, at which point, like, now the Leviathan's choosing Wicked Mask and would add it back to your hand, and you would essentially kind of be a 3 CP summon cancel at that point. Is that really that good? Maybe. Canceling a Cactuar for 3 CP, like, you lose the Wicked Mask, but like you'd be losing the forward anyway, so the game stays the same. It's again, this also interacts very well with the Wind Cecil because they'd be choosing it. They pay the tax to choose. Wicked Mask. Now the summon's choosing a new target. Make them pay the 2 again. Very, very interesting card. The number of the people we'll be playing is going to be very interesting. It is searchable with Nagmalata, but the problem with that is that telegraphing this effect makes it a lot worse. So maybe you run 2 of it in your ice deck, and it's a 3 CP 6k with back attack otherwise. It's not bad, honestly, for a 3 CP 6k that's only situationally a forward. There's no activation condition, just when you say so, use a forward. Very, very interesting card. Rude. So we have a new cycle of Turks using the 7 Remake concept art. So Rude, you can only pay with backups to cast them. On entry, Dulfriza forward. I really don't get why they had the restriction on using backups to cast them. Like, we've had 2 CP Dulfriza character before. Like, there might be like a thematic or lore thing I'm missing, but that just doesn't seem necessary to be on the card. Dulling and freezing a forward doesn't matter that much, but a 3 CP 8k, like, he's above curve, which is very rare for ice, and you're never casting him. Just spoiler alert, if you're playing this Rude, you're not casting him. Very good special, and specials are actually quite kind of relevant for Turks in particular, thanks to a new card we're going to be talking about in a little bit. The biggest problem still remains, if I go into Turks, right? I still think there's an argument that the Lightning starter Turks, the Reno, Rude, and Seng here, are not very far off being very good. And the biggest downside potentially with this package is just a lack of names. Seng is a very powerful card, but you have to have a critical mass of Turks in your deck for him to function. However, because this was the main core of Turks, along with President Shinra and Rufus, the forward, there was never a reason to actually play Ice. Legendary Turk is not good enough to be worth it. So, how much of these each do you play? Do you split Ice Lightning? Do you just play mono Ice Turks? Do you play like an Ice Wind Turks to try to get more value out of Cisne? I can't answer that. I think you probably would want to go Ice Lightning just because then you get benefits from all of the 7 cards, Light Cloud, Light Aerith, Ice Lightning Sephiroth. Johnny and Lightning is a really nice card for the deck. And for what it's worth, the Rude, Reno, and Rufus package in this set is very comprehensive by itself. So Rude is not the sexy card in the archetype, but he is a part of what makes it good. So here is Rufus. This is the first of our Ice Legends. You have a Rude and a Reno. The cost to cast him is reduced by 2. And then when he enters the field or attacks, you can do one of the 3 following actions. So, assuming that you have the Rude and the Reno in your break zone, Rufus is a 2k or 2 CP 7k that will either Dulfriza forward, recur a Turk from your break zone, or make your opponent discard a card. All these effects are good. A 2CP forward that attacks and makes your opponent discard. We call that Laswell, and Laswell was meta-defining for the entirety of, for about 3 sets time, and only really fell off recently, mostly due to there not being a great home for him. Rufus does it on attack. He doesn't need to live to the end of the turn. This card is really, really, really good. The only real question then is it worth building into Ice and Turks to enable this? And I think it probably is. This just is so much better than the old EX Rufus. It's just a matter of what are the Ice Turks you want to play. Obviously, Cisne is very good and can be played off of your Sang, but we need more than that. And then we also need to decide if we're going tricolor and if I still want to play the Wind with it. It will be a deck that I'm experimenting with. And I don't have too much hope other than it being, or like I don't have too much expectations for my older stuff. There's just a decent chance this is just a mono ice package you play now, which with 3 Reno, 3 Rufus, and 3 Rude. Speaking of, here's Reno. Reno's the one that people think is really good. I kind of agree. Reno attacks, you can play a Rude 4 or less. 3 CP 7k, you can pay 1 ice to give him haste. It's kind of like a 3 CP 7k or a 4 CP haste that also plays another forward from your deck. Much worse special, but you don't really complain about it. Like it doesn't need to be incredible. And yeah, definitely an interesting combo. The one thing that is a little bit awkward is that because Reno plays on attack, you don't have a chance to use Rude's dull all the opponent's forward's opponent controls effect, which is a little annoying. It doesn't play super nicely with any Rude other than the new one, but the old one is a very strong card, so I don't know. It remains to be seen what people actually do with this deck. We have now Walk. This is the card that might change Category 6. So if you've been living under a rock, what Category 6 does currently is it plays a title where the deck is 50 Category 6 characters, and they play a 5 CP lock. Let me go ahead and search it up. This one, that lets you basically draw a card if the top card of your deck is a Category 6 character every time you cast a Category 6 character. So you can kind of just spam Category 6 characters and continue to draw. This lock doesn't do that. It is not an engine card in the same way that Big Lock is. However, this lock does have an EX burst in the same way. It reveals the top 4 cards of your deck so you can dig for Category 6 characters, so you can get a backup if you need one. And then if you do a party, he does your opponent 1 point of damage. Doing burn damage like this is never bad, but when it comes attached to a party attack, it's a little different because it doesn't actually increase your damage speed at all. You're not increasing damage. You're almost like, to use a magic keyword, you're giving your forwards trample, which is not the same as what like Lightning or Sophie do, where they're accelerating the pace at which you're killing your opponent. Lock doesn't do that. If you have 4 or more Category 6 forwards party, you break all the forwards, and then presumably the party would hit in for point of damage plus the burn damage plus the dull freeze on the lock or on the Setzer, because you're not getting to 4 Category 6 forwards without a Setzer on field, and maybe you're freezing 2 more characters with the Salice as well. This card is really, 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 really good, unequivocally good. The question then is, what are we doing with Category 6? Are we doing the old lock and we're just adding the demon in, 1 copy of the new Salice, swapping our Setzer, maybe cutting the Stooges, maybe adding water for some new cards there? Or are we running this lock, which allows us to run cards like Amaterasu? It allows us to make cards like Artera a lot better. I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation with 6 as an archetype before we have any idea which of these 2 is actually a better card. And we may not ever know. They may just be different decks with different playstyles at that point that just happen to play 30% of, or 30 cards the exact same in their deck, and just like the last 20 be different. I think that being able to play 30 to 35 Category 6 characters means you can play a much better package of other cards. I think it would make it a lot easier to run water, for instance, if you could play good water backups rather than having to run exactly the Category 6 stuff. I don't know. Amazing art, by the way. One of my favorites in the set. And that is the last card in Ice for the set. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for Wind.